Before a fighter pilot ever sees the enemy, he learns one brutal truth. The sky does not forgive mistakes. Long before the engine starts, before the canopy slides shut, before the runway blurs beneath spinning wheels, there are rules, not suggestions, not guidelines, rules written in blood. In the early years of the Second World War, young pilots across Europe and the Pacific were rushed through training programs that barely kept pace with the losses at the front. Yet no matter the country, whether in the Royal Air Force, the Luftwaffe, or the United States Army Air Forces, one principle remained sacred: discipline in the air was survival. The British learned this the hard way during the Battle of Britain. At first, rigid formations of 3 aircraft flying in tight Vic patterns looked impressive in the sky, but they were slow to react. German pilots flying looser Finger 4 formations had more flexibility and better visibility. The lesson was immediate and deadly: adapt or die. From those early battles came doctrine, and doctrine became law. Never fly alone. Maintain altitude advantage. Protect your wingman. Conserve fuel. Disengage when outnumbered. These were not theoretical ideas developed in classrooms. They were conclusions drawn from burning wreckage scattered across fields and oceans. The concept of the wingman became sacred. In American units, it was drilled endlessly. Lose sight, lose the fight. A pilot's first responsibility was not chasing glory, it was protecting the aircraft beside him. If your wingman survived, you survived. Break formation, and you exposed both of you. Many aces credited their survival not to superior skill, but to discipline. German fighter ace Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring ace in history, was famous not for reckless dogfights, but for patience. He stalked from above, attacked only when the advantage was overwhelming, and disengaged immediately after firing. His rule was simple: see, decide, attack, break away. No dramatic turning duels, no unnecessary risks. On the Allied side, American ace Richard Bong, the top-scoring U.S. pilot of the war, followed similar discipline in the Pacific. He stayed aware of fuel, altitude, and positioning. He avoided showmanship. He survived because he respected the structure taught in training. The training itself was relentless. In the United States, cadets logged hundreds of hours before seeing combat. They practiced formation flying until their necks ached from scanning the sky. Instructors screamed one message repeatedly: altitude is life. An aircraft higher in the sky possessed potential energy. It could dive, accelerate, attack, or escape. The lower aircraft had fewer options. Lose altitude carelessly, and you surrendered initiative. Then there was fuel, the quiet killer. More pilots were lost to empty tanks than to enemy bullets in certain campaigns. Combat over the Pacific stretched across vast distances of open water. A moment of overconfidence, a few extra minutes chasing an enemy fighter, could mean ditching into the ocean with no rescue in sight. Disengagement was another painful lesson. Pride killed. The urge to finish a damaged opponent often lured pilots into traps. Reinforcements arrived. Ammunition ran dry. Speed bled away in tight turns. The rule was clear: if the fight turned against you, leave. Live to fight tomorrow. By the time of the Korean War, jet aircraft made these rules even more critical. Closing speeds doubled. Decisions had to be made in seconds. In the skies over Mig Alley, American pilots flying the F-86 Sabre relied heavily on altitude advantage and teamwork against the agile MiG-15. Stray too far from your element leader, and you might not return. Veteran pilots described air combat as controlled chaos. The sky appeared vast, yet in battle it shrank into a spinning cage of noise and movement. The cockpit vibrated, radios crackled with overlapping shouts, tracers streaked past like fiery needles. In that chaos, structure was sanity. Rules created order where instinct screamed for reaction. Psychology played its part as well. Fear sharpened the senses but clouded judgment. A pilot's heart could hammer at over 180 beats per minute in combat. Vision narrowed, time distorted. Under such stress, training took over. Rehearsed procedures replaced panic. Formation spacing, attack angles, fuel checks, they became automatic. Break those procedures, and you were alone with your fear. History is filled with examples of what happened when discipline failed. During the early Pacific campaigns, inexperienced pilots sometimes chased a single enemy aircraft downward, ignoring warnings from their squadron. Japanese Zero fighters would lure them into lower altitudes where additional enemy planes waited. The result was swift and merciless. Commanders understood something simple. A reckless pilot might achieve one spectacular victory. A disciplined pilot could fight for years. And longevity mattered. Experienced pilots became instructors. They passed on tactics refined through survival. Losing them to unnecessary risks hurt more than losing machines. So squadrons enforced obedience. Debriefings were intense. If a pilot broke formation without cause, he answered for it. If he ignored fuel warnings, he was reprimanded. If he chased a kill instead of guarding his wingman, trust eroded. Because in the air, trust was everything. When two fighters lifted off side by side, each pilot carried not only ammunition and fuel, but responsibility. Responsibility to the man on his wing, responsibility to the mission, responsibility to the rules that kept them breathing. And yet, throughout the history of aerial warfare, there were always exceptions. Men who felt confined by doctrine, pilots who believed instinct mattered more than instruction. They watched the same training films, they memorized the same procedures, they understood the same risks, but when the sky exploded into violence, they chose differently. Most of them died quickly. A few did not. This is the story of one of those few. He was taught the same rules as every other fighter pilot. He understood the doctrine. He knew the consequences. And when the moment came, he broke every single one.
By the time he reached his operational squadron, he already had a reputation. Not for insubordination, not yet, but for something instructors struggled to define. He flew differently. In training, discipline was visible. Cadets held tight formation. They repeated procedures word for word. They respected the chain of command as if it were gravity itself. He respected it too. But when the aircraft left the runway and the ground fell away, something changed. Other pilots flew by the checklist. He flew by instinct. During advanced fighter training, instructors emphasized one commandment above all: stay with your element leader, maintain spacing, protect your wingman. He did, technically, but he pushed the limits. He flew slightly wider patterns. He tested altitude margins. He experimented with angles of approach during mock dogfights. Where others performed textbook attack runs, he improvised. Sometimes it worked brilliantly. Sometimes it terrified his instructors. In one training exercise, he broke formation for 3 seconds, to reposition for a better firing solution during a simulated engagement. On paper, it was a violation. In practice, he shot down 2 opponents in quick succession. The debrief was tense. You abandoned your wingman. I improved the kill zone. That's not the point. He listened. He nodded. He accepted the reprimand. And the next day, he did it again. just differently enough to avoid formal punishment. He wasn't reckless, that was the confusing part. Reckless pilots were easy to identify. They dove too fast, they ignored fuel gauges, they chased targets blindly, they burned out quickly. He calculated everything. He studied combat reports from earlier wars. He read about the discipline of Erich Hartmann and the teamwork doctrine refined during the Battle of Britain. He knew that survival favored patience and structure. But he also noticed something else in those reports: moments. Moments where rigid formation failed to adapt. Moments where hesitation cost lives. Moments where a split-second deviation could have changed the outcome. He began asking questions instructors didn't like. What if altitude advantage isn't available? What if the enemy expects textbook tactics? What if unpredictability is the advantage? Instructors answered the same way every time. Doctrine exists for a reason. He agreed, but he didn't entirely believe it. When he finally arrived at an operational fighter squadron, the stakes became real. No more simulated guns, no more chalkboard diagrams. Now there were live rounds, real enemy aircraft, and the understanding that one mistake would not result in paperwork, it would result in fire. The squadron commander was a veteran, calm, methodical, a believer in structure. On the first briefing, the commander made expectations clear. We fly as a unit, no heroes, no lone wolves. If you break formation without direct cause, you answer to me. He nodded with everyone else. The first combat patrol was uneventful, high altitude, clear skies, routine. The second was not. Radar reported incoming enemy fighters. The squadron climbed for altitude advantage, sun behind them, perfect positioning. The commander gave calm, precise instructions over the radio. Hold formation, wait for my mark. Below, the enemy formation shifted unexpectedly. Instead of continuing forward, they split into two groups, climbing sharply. The geometry of the engagement changed instantly. For a few seconds, crucial seconds, confusion crept in. He saw something others did not. One of the enemy elements was slightly separated, exposed, vulnerable for perhaps 5 seconds before rejoining the main group. 5 seconds in air combat is eternity. Hold, the commander repeated. He hesitated. Training said wait. Instinct said move. He broke. Not dramatically, not wildly, just a controlled, calculated roll and dive, angling toward the isolated pair. Return to formation, the radio barked. He was already accelerating. The dive gave him speed. The speed gave him surprise. The enemy pilots, focused on regrouping, never saw him until tracer fire crossed their canopy. One aircraft erupted in smoke. He pulled up sharply, conserving energy, scanning for threats. His wingman, torn between loyalty to formation and loyalty to him, followed half a second later. Now the sky exploded into motion. The squadron commander was forced to engage earlier than planned. The carefully arranged altitude advantage dissolved into a swirling dogfight. In the chaos, he stayed calm. He didn't chase recklessly. He struck once, disengaged briefly, repositioned, struck again, controlled aggression. When fuel levels approached caution range, he checked them, just as training demanded. When ammunition ran low, he reported it. And when the fight finally broke apart, he returned to formation as if nothing unusual had happened. Back on the ground, the atmosphere was electric. One confirmed enemy destroyed, but protocol violated. The debrief lasted longer than the mission itself. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, sir. You forced the squadron into engagement before we were fully set. Yes, sir. Why? He didn't hesitate. Because they were vulnerable for 5 seconds. After that, we would have lost the opportunity. Silence filled the room. The gun camera footage supported his claim. The separation was visible. The window was real and brief. The commander dismissed the squadron and kept him behind. You were right and you were wrong, the commander said quietly. That was the paradox. His action had secured the first kill of the engagement. It may have prevented the enemy from organizing a coordinated attack, but it had also disrupted the plan. Air combat relied on trust, predictability within the unit. If every pilot acted independently on instinct, the sky would become chaos. Yet chaos sometimes favored the bold. Word spread through the squadron. Some pilots admired him. They felt he had done what others were too cautious to attempt. Others distrusted him. If he broke formation again, would they be exposed, covering his absence? The commander made a decision. No formal punishment this time, but a warning. Next time you gamble, make sure it's worth more than one aircraft. The message was clear. He was being watched. From that day forward, every movement he made in the air carried additional weight. Every deviation, every aggressive angle, every split-second choice was scrutinized. And still, he continued to test the boundaries. Not because he wanted glory, not because he craved attention, but because, deep down, he believed something dangerous, that rules were built for averages, and he did not intend to be average. The next mission would push that belief to its limit, and this time the gamble would be far greater than 5 seconds.
The mission was never supposed to turn into a dogfight. It was a routine escort assignment: protect strike aircraft, maintain altitude advantage, avoid unnecessary engagement. Simple on paper, predictable, structured. The briefing room that morning was calm, weather clear, visibility excellent. Intelligence reported light enemy presence in the sector. The squadron commander repeated the doctrine: stay tight, maintain top cover, we engage only if necessary. No one chases, no one breaks formation without my order. Eyes met across the room. Some glanced at him. He said nothing. The formation lifted off just after dawn. Engines roared and synchronized thunder. One by one, the aircraft climbed into pale morning light, forming a layered shield above the slower bombers below. At 20,000 feet, the world felt distant and silent. The horizon curved gently. The sun burned white against the canopy. For 15 minutes, nothing. Then the warning came. Bandits, 11 o'clock, high. They weren't supposed to be there. Enemy fighters, more than expected, diving from a superior altitude. In air combat, altitude is life, and in that instant, life belonged to the enemy. The commander reacted immediately. Climb, tighten formation. But the geometry was wrong. The enemy had already begun their descent. Speed was on their side. The first pass was violent. Tracers ripped through the air. One bomber fell out of formation, trailing smoke. The sky fractured into spirals of motion. Engage! Engage! The squadron broke into defensive maneuvers. The structured shield dissolved into individual fights. He saw the problem immediately. They were reacting, climbing defensively, turning tightly, bleeding speed. The rules said maintain mutual support, protect your wingman, avoid isolation. But the enemy had numbers and altitude. Staying tight meant becoming predictable. He made a decision that violated nearly everything he'd been taught. Instead of climbing to recover altitude, he pushed the nose down. He dove. Radio calls exploded in his headset. "Where are you going? Pull up! Regain altitude!" He ignored them. The dive gave him speed, far more than a defensive climb ever could. The aircraft shuddered as gravity pulled him downward. The altimeter unwound rapidly. Below the main engagement, 2 enemy fighters were repositioning after their attack run. They expected Allied aircraft to climb defensively. They did not expect one to dive beneath the fight. He leveled briefly, converting altitude into raw acceleration, then pulled sharply upward into a climbing attack from below, the least expected direction. At close range, air combat becomes intimate and terrifying. No long-distance bursts, no safe margins, just metal, glass, and split-second timing. He closed fast. Too fast. Another rule: never engage at extremely close range. It reduces reaction time. It eliminates escape options. He fired anyway. The first enemy aircraft erupted in flame at less than 200 meters. Debris flashed past his canopy. He didn't celebrate, he didn't linger. Instead of climbing away to safety, as Doctrine required, he rolled inverted and dropped back down, deeper into lower altitude. Now he was alone. Above him, his squadron struggled to regain formation. Below him, scattered enemy aircraft searched for targets. Fuel warning flickered briefly on his peripheral gauge. Another rule: monitor fuel constantly, never sacrifice reserve for aggression. He calculated quickly. Enough for 10 more minutes of high-power flight, maybe less. Then he saw it. One of his own squadron mates, separated and being pursued by 2 enemy fighters. The safe decision would have been to climb back to friendly altitude and rejoin structured defense. Instead, he accelerated toward the pair, alone. He did not call for permission, he did not announce his position. He came in at maximum throttle from low 6 o'clock, the blind spot beneath and behind the trailing enemy aircraft. He fired a short burst. The pursuing fighter snapped sideways, smoking heavily. The second enemy pilot reacted instantly, braking hard into a turn. Now it was one-on-one. Another rule: avoid turning fights when low on energy. Turning bleeds speed. Speed is survival. But disengaging would abandon his squadron mate. He committed. The 2 aircraft spiraled downward in tightening circles. G-forces pressed against his chest. Vision narrowed at the edges. The world became a spinning tunnel of sky and earth. He remembered something from training. Most pilots pull too hard in sustained turns. They panic. They overcorrect. He eased slightly, conserving just enough energy. The enemy pilot overshot. For half a second, the opposing aircraft drifted across his gun sight. He fired. Silence. The enemy fighter rolled inverted and fell away. 3 engagements, 2 confirmed destroyed, 1 driven off. But now reality returned. Altitude dangerously low. Fuel critically low. Ammunition nearly exhausted. And he was alone beneath the main engagement. Radio chatter above indicated the fight was breaking apart. The enemy, having lost several aircraft unexpectedly, began withdrawing. He pushed throttle back slightly, conserving what remained of his fuel. Climbing slowly now, painfully slowly, he rejoined scattered friendly aircraft, limping back towards base. The sky grew quiet again. Back on the runway, the silence inside the cockpit felt heavier than the combat had. Ground crew stared at his aircraft, scorch marks along the fuselage, fuel gauge nearly empty. In the debriefing room, tension returned. You dove out of formation. Yes, sir. You descended below operational altitude. Yes, sir. You engaged alone, twice. Yes, sir. You nearly ran dry. A pause. Yes, sir. Gun camera footage rolled in silence. Frame by frame, the room watched the dive, the attack from below, the close-range shots, the rescue of a squadron mate seconds before impact. When the footage ended, no one spoke immediately. The commander finally leaned back. You know you can't keep doing that. He didn't respond immediately, because deep down he knew something unsettling. The rules almost cost them that fight, and breaking them almost cost him his life. The line between those 2 truths was becoming thinner with every mission, and next time the gamble would be even bigger.
Victory in the air does not end when the engines shut down. Sometimes it begins there. The morning after the engagement, the atmosphere on base was different. Mechanics moved more quietly. Intelligence officers walked with folders clutched tightly under their arms. Pilots avoided speculation in public spaces. Because what had happened in the sky was now a matter of record. 3 enemy aircraft destroyed, 1 friendly pilot saved, bombers protected, mission technically successful. And yet the official report carried a different tone. Deviation from assigned formation, unauthorized engagement, critical fuel mismanagement risk. Words matter in military paperwork.
They decide careers. They decide reputations. He was ordered to report to the operations office at 0900. No one said the word court-martial, but it hung in the air anyway. Inside the briefing room sat the squadron commander, the executive officer, and a representative from Group Command. The mood was not hostile, but it was cold. A projector hummed softly. The gun camera footage was ready again. The group commander spoke first. "You understand that discipline is what keeps squadrons alive." "Yes, sir." "You also understand that individual initiative cannot override coordinated strategy." "Yes, sir." The footage began to play. There was the dive, the attack from below, the tight turning fight at low altitude, the fuel warning light flashing faintly on the edge of the frame. "Explain your decision to dive," the commander said. He answered calmly. "They had altitude superiority. Climbing would have put us further behind in energy. Diving converted altitude into speed. Speed disrupted their second pass. And descending below the engagement envelope? They didn't expect it." The room remained silent. Military doctrine is built on probabilities. It assumes average human reaction under extreme stress. It reduces variables. It eliminates unnecessary risk. But combat is not a controlled environment. The group commander leaned forward. "You understand that if every pilot acted independently, we would have chaos." "With respect, sir," he replied carefully, "it was already chaos." That sentence lingered. It was not defiance. It was observation. The discussion shifted to numbers. Enemy losses confirmed by intelligence, 3 aircraft. Friendly losses, 1 bomber damaged, no fighters lost. Then came the fuel data. He had landed with less than 3 minutes of reserve. Another 60 seconds of combat, and he would have ditched. That fact alone nearly ended the conversation. "Luck," one officer muttered. Maybe it was, but luck does not explain positioning. Luck does not explain timing. Still, command could not ignore precedent. If they praised him openly, others might imitate him, without his precision, without his calculation. The squadron commander finally spoke. "Your actions were tactically effective, strategically dangerous." There it was, the core of the dilemma. Air forces do not fight with individuals, they fight with systems. Systems require predictability. Predictability requires obedience. A single unpredictable success can inspire. A dozen unpredictable pilots can destroy coordination. The meeting adjourned without a final decision. For 48 hours, uncertainty followed him like a shadow. Some pilots congratulated him quietly. The man he had saved gripped his shoulder without words. Others kept distance. One senior pilot confronted him directly in the hangar. "You make the rest of us look cautious." "I don't have that intention." "It doesn't matter what your intention is." He understood the tension. Courage in war is admired, but unpredictability is feared. On the 3rd day, orders arrived from Group Command. He was to receive an official commendation for aggressive action under fire, and an official reprimand for unauthorized deviation from formation protocol. Both would enter his file. It was almost absurd, rewarded and punished for the same decision. During the small ceremony, the commanding officer pinned the ribbon onto his uniform without smiling. "Let this represent both recognition and warning." Applause followed, controlled, restrained. Afterwards, in private, the commander spoke more openly. "You were right about one thing," he admitted. "The engagement had already broken down. Your move changed momentum." He paused. "But understand this, if you had died down there, I would be explaining to your family why you ignored direct orders." That reality settled heavily. Air combat is often remembered through statistics and medals, but behind every deviation is a letter waiting to be written.
In the weeks that followed, analysts reviewed the battle in detail. Intelligence officers reconstructed the geometry of the fight. They calculated angles, speeds, energy states. The conclusions surprised some of them. His dive had not only disrupted the enemy, it had forced them to abandon coordinated altitude cycling, a tactic designed to maintain energy superiority. By attacking from below, he had inverted the engagement dynamic. Unofficially, instructors began discussing the maneuver during advanced briefings, not as doctrine, but as possibility. And that was perhaps the most dangerous outcome of all, because now the idea existed that under certain conditions, breaking the rules could create advantage. The squadron commander adjusted procedures slightly after that mission. He allowed greater spacing during initial engagements. He authorized limited independent action if formation integrity was already compromised. Small changes, subtle, but meaningful. Still, he kept a close eye on him. One evening, standing beside the runway as aircraft returned from patrol, the commander spoke quietly. "You walk a narrow line." "I know." "No, you don't. Not yet," the commander said. He looked up at the fading sky. "There's a difference between calculated risk and gambling. Calculated risk is controlled. Gambling depends on fortune." He let the words sink in. "Make sure you always know which one you're doing." Because the truth was simple. So far, his instincts had been right. So far, his fuel had lasted. So far, the enemy had reacted exactly as he predicted. But war is adaptive. The enemy learns, patterns are studied, and the next time he broke formation, the sky might be waiting for him. Commendation or court-martial had been decided. The greater verdict, survival, was still pending, and the next mission would test whether he was a tactical genius or simply a man who had been lucky twice.
War has a way of turning men into legends. But legends are dangerous. They simplify what should never be simplified. By the time his combat tour reached its final months, stories about him had spread beyond his squadron. Some described him as fearless. Others called him reckless. A few used a quieter word, instinctive. The truth was less dramatic. He was disciplined, just not in the way doctrine expected. Fighter rules were not invented to suppress creativity. They were created to reduce chaos. They existed because most pilots, under extreme stress, defaulted to panic. Tight formations, altitude discipline, fuel margins, these were guardrails against human error. And human error in the sky is fatal. Military historians often point to aces like Erich Hartmann or Richard Bong as examples of strict tactical discipline. They survived not by dramatic duels, but by choosing when not to fight. They disengaged more than they attacked. They avoided unnecessary risk. He studied those patterns carefully. What made his case different was not that he ignored the rules blindly. It was that he understood them deeply enough to recognize when the situation had already broken them. There is a critical difference between breaking formation in a stable engagement and breaking formation when formation has already collapsed. In his most controversial fights, structure was gone before he acted. Enemy altitude superiority, disrupted geometry, fragmented communication. The battlefield had already abandoned the script. He adapted faster than others. Psychologists who later studied combat behavior described a trait common among certain high-performing fighter pilots: controlled aggression combined with rapid situational recalibration. In simple terms, the ability to assess shifting variables without freezing. Most pilots, when doctrine fails, hesitate. They search mentally for the correct procedure. He did not hesitate. He recalculated. Energy state, positioning, enemy expectation, fuel, escape vector. Every deviation he made had an exit strategy, even if that exit was dangerously narrow. That was why he lived.
not because he was fearless. In fact, he admitted privately that fear sharpened his decisions. When the fuel-wanting light blinked during that low-altitude dogfight, he felt it, a cold, tightening awareness. But fear did not paralyze him, it focused him. There is another uncomfortable truth about fighter rules. They are written for the majority. Air forces train thousands of pilots. Doctrine must work for average reaction times, average spatial awareness, average stress tolerance. But occasionally, a pilot operates beyond that statistical center. The danger lies in assuming that exceptional outcomes justify universal change. Command never rewrote official doctrine because of him, but they refined it. Greater flexibility in broken engagements, emphasis on dynamic positioning rather than rigid altitude ladders, increased training in energy management under chaotic conditions, small evolutions. Doctrine did not disappear, it adapted. As his final combat tour ended, he had accumulated a record that drew attention: victories, survival, successful escorts. But he had also accumulated something less visible: scrutiny. Higher command interviewed him before reassignment. "Why didn't you follow orders precisely?" He answered honestly, "Because sometimes the situation changes faster than the order." That sentence was later quoted in training discussions, not as rebellion, as a reminder. War is fluid. Rules provide structure, but structure must bend or it will shatter. When his final mission concluded, there was no dramatic farewell, no cinematic speech, just another landing, another shutdown checklist, another quiet walk across the tarmac. He removed his helmet and looked back at the aircraft. Metal, rivets, fuel lines, machine guns. None of it cared about doctrine. Physics cares about speed. Gravity cares about altitude. Fuel cares about time. The sky does not care about rules. Rules are human attempts to survive the sky. In the years after the war, analysts reviewed countless engagements. They found that most pilots who broke formation without overwhelming situational awareness were shot down within minutes. Recklessness has a short lifespan in aerial combat. So why did he survive? Because he did not break rules emotionally, he broke them mathematically. When the odds shifted, he shifted faster. When altitude was lost, he converted it to speed. When formation fractured, he exploited unpredictability before the enemy stabilized. And when fuel dropped too low, he disengaged, barely. Luck played a role. It always does in war. But luck favors preparation. If a single variable had shifted, one unseen enemy above him, one delayed trigger pull, one miscalculated fuel burn, this story would not exist. He would be remembered as another pilot who ignored doctrine and paid for it. Instead, he became a case study. Not proof that rules are wrong, proof that understanding them deeply is what allows controlled deviation. There was a final irony. The very rules he broke had trained him well enough to break them intelligently. Without discipline, his instincts would have been chaos. Without structure, his aggression would have been suicide. In the end, he did not reject doctrine, he mastered it. And mastery gave him the rare ability to know when survival required something different. Young pilots today still hear the same core lessons. Never fly alone. Maintain altitude advantage, protect your wingman, monitor fuel, disengage when necessary. Those rules remain undefeated. But somewhere in advanced tactical discussions, instructors add a quieter truth. Understand why the rule exists. Because in rare moments, when the sky fractures, when geometry collapses, when seconds decide everything, survival may belong to the pilot who sees the pattern break and adapts before anyone else does. He broke every fighter rule, and he lived. Not because rules don't matter, because he knew exactly when they did and when they no longer could.